Shalom. Giving all praises, honor, and glory to our power, Yahweh. Baha Shem Yahweh Shai, Baha Shem Rachak Wadash. Double honors to the apostles, the bishops, and the elders of Great Millstone. Peace and blessings to the hopeful elect of the tabernacles of David, scattered throughout the four corners of the earth, and wherever you may be. Wherever you may be, to you I say Shalom, Yahshua, Shalom. Alright, I popped up this random question that I had here in the AI mode. It says, how many states protested due to the recent ICE shooting in Minneapolis? All right, now, aside from that, I'll mention real quick that you have the big noise as far as protests are going right now, is probably Iran, and then you actually have people who are protesting in America about this current situation in Iran. And I believe it was in Cali where there was a U-Haul truck that drove into a crowd. That was the crowd that was in Cali who were protesting about Iran. And Esau probably has his hand in that, what we call a Fantastic Four, an FF. Okay, second word flag, possibly, maybe, who knows? But we know how Esau operates. I'm not sure if anybody, was deleted. I have to double back on the news as far as what I've seen. It hasn't mentioned any deletions, but you never know. As far as I know right now, there hasn't been any deletions. But yeah, you had that recent situation there. People in America protesting about what's going on in Iran. It was no different than when the Israeli, the Arab situation happened. I forget the name, the name I was looking for. But the state of Israel against the Palestinians. You actually had people protesting. Obviously, the difference is back east, but then you had people all the way over here in the States, in different cities. One of those major cities was New York. Okay, protesting and making division between the situation about Israel and Palestine. All right, so this is a normal thing that happens. And now you have this recent situation with Renee, what's her name? Renee Good. Yeah, right here at the top. Renee Nicole Good. Okay. So I typed in how many states protested due to the recent ICE shooting in Minneapolis, and I found this interesting here, and I'm gonna tell you why in a second. In the wake of the fatal, we'll just read it. Fatal shooting of Renee Nicole Good, my goodness, by an ICE agent in Minneapolis. Protests have been reported in at least 15 states, all right, and the District of Columbia, as part of a coordinated ICE Out for Good weekend of action. Now, I saw some news clips, but I know how YouTube be jacking around with stuff. But this title here, ICE Out for Good weekend of action, I saw something that was way back from November 1st of last year. I'm not sure if that's true or not, because like I said, sometimes YouTube plays around with the dates, where something new will be something new and the date will be old, or there'll be something old, the date will be new. I don't know why they do that, but it kind of causes confusion with certain things. But anyways, as far as right now, we'll just deal with the right now. They're calling it the ICE Out for Good weekend of action. Okay, so it says organizers from the Indivisible Project noted that hundreds of demonstrations were scheduled across the country. States and cities with confirmed protest activity include, this was over the weekend, all right, Arizona, Tempe, Arizona, all right, Los Angeles and Sacramento and Cali, which we just mentioned that U-Haul situation from, Denver, Colorado, all right, Boca Raton, and other scheduled locations, so various locations of Florida. All right, in GA, you got ATL, Kansas, Lawrence, and other scheduled locations, so various places there. Boston, Mass, as well as Worcester, Minneapolis, Minnesota, obviously, and it says also at the site of the shooting, so I'm back on that very same street there. I guess that would make sense. Lincoln, Nebraska, New York, and Manhattan, as well as Rochester for New York. And right here it says Durham, North Carolina. Now, what I found interesting about that is I know that Durham is one of more of the major cities here in North Carolina. I noticed it's also the only one listed, but I know because I went to camp and there were actually people protesting here, okay, in the city that I live in. So Where I live at is not listed here. Obviously not, because there's only one city listed here. But that goes to show me, if that's just here in my state, North Carolina, there were people protesting here in my city, and they only have Durham listed. So what's the difference from these other states, as well as maybe even states that are not even listed? So there may be even more protests than what's actually been listed here in this list. So I found that very interesting there, because people definitely protested here. It says Portland, Oregon, and I wasn't, near the protest. I was actually in another area, but I saw people, I heard people, wait, because every time they're protesting, where they're protesting at, the area that I might be in, it's probably, a good stretch down, at least 2, might even be 3 blocks, depending on what side of the street you're on, because some blocks are longer than others. So maybe 2, 3, basically back towards a bridge and a main street, here, 10th Street. And so I can hear them, they'll be, the horns blaring and the people screaming. So I can hear them all the way back, those 2, 3 blocks away, where I'll be at camp from time to time. So that's how I know they were protesting, because I could hear them. All right, moving on, says Portland, Oregon, Philly, Penn, Austin, Texas, as well as El Paso, Seattle, Washington, Martinsburg, West Virginia, and then it says protests were held at Lafayette Park and ICE headquarters, at the ICE headquarters in DC. Now, the last situation, actually, no, that was all around the Renee Good. I was going to mention the people were rallied around this hotel where ICE agents were staying at in Minneapolis. They were beating drums and making noise and all this kind of stuff. So yeah, a lot of things have been happening behind this, which it was also, when I saw that, I was like, man, she looked like she plays for the same team. But of course, I wasn't sure. And then I saw that video that came out, the second video that came out, that showed more. And basically, and that's the pride of, a lot of these people in America. Okay, you might not like ICE, but why are you, pestering and talking ish to these guys who've been set up to, I like the job that they're doing, but they have been put in this position to do this job, man. Okay, and so, and then other information comes out, with all this, Mason stuff. And so, even if Esau had a hand in it, at the end of the day, you could still say it was judgment, because that bullet could have been her judgment, just for playing for the same team. But then Esau, also have his hand playing it. But it was random thoughts or whatever. But I was like, yeah, because when I saw that second lady that was with her, I knew for sure. And then I think we have some clip here where it talks about she leaves behind wife and child. So that says enough. Anyways, not even important. There's some random thoughts there. So yeah, District of Columbia protests were held at Lafayette Park and ICE headquarters. Activists have utilized an online tracker provided by Indivisible to coordinate over 1,000 events nationwide. Big number. Would you like more information? Okay, no thank you, chat. Yeah, but that's straightforward. And we always get the same scriptures in the Apocrypha, uproars of the people, 2 Esdras chapter 9, as well as the one in 2 Esdras chapter 15, sedition among men. So you can read those. You can read 2 Esdras chapter 9, start from the top, and 2 Esdras chapter 15, starting at verse 14, and probably like 2, maybe 3 scriptures down from there, where it talks about sedition among men. But this is what we see slowly leading up to. These events keep happening, okay, and they're getting worse and worse, because we're in the open phases of Jacob's trouble now. It's going to be complete uproars of the people, okay, or that chaotic, time period is coming. All right. So that's pretty much all I want to talk about. I wanted to read off this list here. Yeah, you could just check out the rest of the news we have. Nothing super major. A couple good things in there. So Lord will you edify.
And maybe it's the internet, but all over the country, we can have a country, a nation that for once lives up to its liberty and for all, without ICE. Abolish ICE now. ICE, you will never be welcome.
Tensions are high in the U.S. right now, and it all comes down to one question. What really happened in Minneapolis? This week, 37-year-old mother of three, Renee Nicole Good, was shot and killed during an ICE operation in Minneapolis by Officer Jonathan Ross. Since then, videos showing the incident from multiple angles have gone viral globally, and the country is sharply divided over how to interpret what they saw. ICE's account is that Ross acted in self-defense, claiming Good drove her SUV toward agents and posed an immediate threat. That version has been backed by Trump and his administration. President Donald Trump described Good as a professional agitator. Vice President J.D. Vance added fuel to the growing controversy, using the case in a speech to justify ICE's actions nationwide. But eyewitnesses and local officials, and even the Minneapolis mayor, James Frey, reject that account. Some witnesses say Good was attempting to leave the scene when an agent reached for her driver's side door, moments before the shots were fired. Online, social media users are now dissecting the footage frame by frame, zooming in on the wheels and the car's angle, debating whether it was moving toward or away from the agent. Investigators have not drawn conclusions, and the video remains under review. People close to Renee, including her wife and mother, say she was kind, nonviolent, and would never intentionally harm anyone. Since the shooting, protests have erupted across the U.S., and Minnesota Governor Tim Walz has activated the National Guard as a precaution. Federal investigators are still reviewing the evidence, but the case has already grown into a national flashpoint over force, accountability, and public
well,
trust.
you can certainly hear it all around us, and this has been the scene since before sunrise. Now, these nurses are out on the picket lines because they say things aren't happening inside, and there's never a good time to have this many essential workers off the job. But these nurses say they are prepared to stay on the picket lines until what they say are essential demands are met. Nurses inside Mount Sinai who are actually on duty joined their colleagues who cheered them on from the picket lines once the strike started at 6 a.m. Nurses from 5 major hospitals in the city are on strike. That's Mount Sinai Morningside, Mount Sinai West, Montefiore, and New York Presbyterian Hospital. A union representing the nurses tells us that negotiations with the head of those hospital systems stalled over what they called unfair labor practices, with demands like higher pay and safer working conditions. They're the kind of demands similar to the last major nursing strike in the city in 2023. That stoppage lasted for 3 days and resulted in a deal that raised pay by 19%. This strike comes after an incident just last week where a man wielding a sharp object was shot and killed by police at New York Presbyterian Brooklyn Methodist Hospital after barricading himself inside of a room with 2 others.
We're fighting for safe staffing. We deserve health care, especially as healthcare workers. Patient safety. Safety for us, there's a lot of violence in the workplace. And patient safe staffing ratios.
There have been improvements since our last strike, but there's still more progress to have been made. And there's been discussions about them possibly wanting to take that away from us. They want to take back a lot of the things that we were able to progress on with the last strike. So a lot of this is not even just for progress, but also maintaining what we fought for in our last strike.
Mount Sinai issued a statement saying, in part, quote, "Unfortunately, NYSNA decided to move forward with its strike while refusing to move on from its extreme economic demands, which we cannot agree to. But we are ready with 1,400 qualified and specialized nurses and prepared to continue to provide safe patient care for as long as the strike continues." Let's go ahead and bring you back live, and we're going to walk around because you see them wearing their trademark red. They have their signs on. They're whistling. They have support from the city buses, the FDNY, and others as they get by. And we do know that Governor Kathy Hochul has issued an emergency declaration to help with staffing shortages as this strike continues. But these are folks who say they're going to stay on the job as long as it takes. We are live in the Upper East Side this morning. Tracy Strahan, News 4 New York.
Tracy, thank you. And News 4's Romney Smith is at New York Presbyterian Columbia Hospital in Washington Heights with another show of support where Mayor Mamdani and other elected officials are at that rally in support of the nurses. Romney.
That's right. We know that there are several political heavyweights that are throwing their support behind so many of these nurses that are on strike right now. Now, we know New York City's mayor, Zohran Mamdani, speaking to the crowd of healthcare professionals, lending his support, saying while he's monitoring the situation, he firmly believes that nurses should not have to accept less pay, fewer benefits, or less dignity while performing life-saving work. In addition to Mamdani, today's speakers also included New York Attorney General Letitia James and the borough presidents from Manhattan, Queens, Brooklyn, and more. Now, nurses here tell us that they appreciate the political support and hope that it will influence ongoing negotiations in their favor. Mamdani and other leaders all echoing that the goal is to reach a resolution that respects nurses and keeps hospitals open.
This strike is not just a question of how much nurses earn per hour or what health benefits they receive, although both of those issues matter deeply. It is also a question of who deserves to benefit from this system. There is no shortage of wealth in the healthcare industry. That's right. Especially so at the 3 privately operated hospital groups at which nurses are striking, the wealthiest in the entire city.
Now, as you can clearly see behind me, there are so many nurses wearing red, holding signs, and making a lot of noise in support of their ongoing efforts. This strike will continue until a resolution is reached. Once we learn the terms of that, we'll of course share that with you both on air and online.
The world is watching Syria like a ticking time bomb. What was once thought to be a fading battlefield has all of a sudden exploded again, with smoke, missile, and the roar of fighter jets slicing through the entire sky. Well, this is not an ordinary warfare. This is America's brutal revenge. Basically, a massive wave of airstrikes launched deep into Syria, aimed at Islamic State remnants that dared to strike the US forces on Syrian soil. You're watching Times XP. My name is Rithi Atri, and only weeks after Venezuelan chaos made headlines, another crisis has broken out thousands of miles away. The United States, under President Donald Trump, has ordered one of the biggest military operations in Syria in months, hitting dozens of Islamic State targets with precision bomb and very powerful aircrafts, where it all traces back to deadly ambush near Palmyra. In December, Islamic State fighters, they attacked a US and Syrian position, killing 2 American soldiers on a US interpreter. Well, the first US military death in Syria since the Assad regime fell in 2024. Well, that particular attack lit the entire fuse, and the response, it was swift, it was fierce. Well, what followed is being called Operation Hawkeye Strike. Under this campaign, the US military, backed by regional partners, carried out a series of coordinated strikes across Syria, targeting ISIS command centers, their weapons depots, supply routes, and training areas. More than 90 bombs and missiles were dropped, fired from a fleet of jets including F-15s, A-10 attack planes, and AC-130 gunships, and drones that darkened the skies over the ISIS territory. Now, this was not a small retaliation that we are talking about. It was a message, basically a declaration that attacking American forces, it will not go unanswered. In the meantime, Mr. Trump and US commanders, they are making it crystal clear that if you harm our people, we will hunt you down wherever you hide. After years of civil war, the old alliances have shifted. The Syrian government, now led by the new leadership after Assad in 2024, is cooperating with the US in the fight against ISIS. But yet, this coordination is fragile because inside Syria, the battle is not just against ISIS. Kurdish-led forces, local militia, and transnational government of Aleppo, they are stuck in a tensed and very uneasy peace. Here, one wrong move and the whole situation could spiral out of control. And the regional implications, they are massive. Iran, Turkey, other powers, they are watching closely. Every bomb that falls, it can really redraw the alliances. Every fighter jet in the sky raises question about where this war is really heading next.
This is not just an airstrike, this is the US sending a clear signal. A signal that it remains willing to use force far from its own shores to protect its people and interests. From the desert battlefield near Palmyra to the fractured street of Aleppo, Syria is still a region at war, and the fight against terror, it is far from over.
And US President Donald Trump has made his intentions clear. He wants Greenland, but his European allies stand in opposition. They are now considering boosting military presence in Greenland to show Trump that they mean business. And taking a jibe at the state of security of Greenland, he said that it has nothing to defend itself from a possible US incursion other than dog sleds. He further alleged that the island is at any given moment swarmed by Russian or Chinese naval vessels that the US must steer clear of.
If we don't take Greenland, Russia or China will take Greenland, and I am not going to let that happen.
Is there any deal they can offer you?
Yeah, sure, I'd love to make a deal with them. It's easier. But one way or the other, we're going to have Greenland.
And he went on to reiterate the strategic importance of Greenland to the US and why it needs to prevent Russia or China from occupying it in the future. Despite the US's military presence in the island under a 1951 agreement, Trump believes it is not enough, agreeing to Trump's statement that Greenland is a threat, that Greenland is at threat from Russia and China. The NATO chief, in fact, has now said the NATO member countries are discussing and working on the next steps for how to collectively keep the Arctic safe. The NATO chief even said that the alliance has previously also discussed the same and is looking ahead to protect what's at stake.
Let me first of all stress that all allies agree on the importance of the Arctic and Arctic security, because we know that with sea lanes opening up, there is a risk that the Russians and the Chinese will be more active. And currently we are working on the next steps to make sure that indeed we collectively protect what is at stake here.
And reacting to this, China has now urged the United States to not use other countries as an excuse to pursue its own interests. China also called for respecting the rights and freedoms of all nations to conduct lawful activities in the Arctic.
The Arctic is in the overall interest of the international community. China's activities in the Arctic aim to promote peace, stability, and sustainable development in the region and are in accordance with international law. The rights and freedoms of all countries to conduct activities in the Arctic in accordance with the law should be fully respected. The United States should not use other countries as an excuse to pursue its own selfish interests.
And as the White House discusses potential plans to annex Greenland, including a possible buyout reportedly, European countries led by Britain and Germany are discussing plans to boost their military presence in Greenland and the region. The European Union also has come forward saying that it can help provide security for Greenland should Denmark request it, warning that a US military takeover of Greenland would be the end of NATO. Meanwhile, Donald Trump, in a Truth Social post, claimed it's him who saved the NATO. Amid this, the European Commissioner for Defense and Space has said that he did not think a US military invasion was coming. However, he said if needed, the EU will be stepping up under the conditions of Treaty Article 42.7 that obliges member states to come to Denmark's assistance if faced with military aggression. Denmark's Prime Minister has now said that her country faces a decisive moment in its diplomatic battle with the United States over Greenland during a debate, saying that the stakes go beyond the immediate issue of Greenland's future. This comes ahead of a meeting between Denmark and the US, scheduled to meet this week, in fact, to discuss Greenland. Greenland and Denmark have time and again reiterated that Greenland is not for sale, but Trump has not ruled out taking it by force.
Cuba is facing renewed threats from Washington. American President Donald Trump is pushing the Cuban government to the breaking point. The communist establishment at the heart of the Caribbean has been a point of frustration for Washington for the last 6 decades. And once again, the United States is gradually raising the heat on Cuba. Trump has issued an ultimatum Cuba must make a deal before it is too late. This ultimatum does not have any deadline, and it also lacks a clear outline about what type of deal Trump wants from Havana. Earlier, the U.S. president reposted a message that jokingly suggested that U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who is the child of Cuban immigrants, could also become the president of Cuba. Threats from Washington have drawn an angry retort from Havana. President Miguel Diaz-Canel has said that no one would tell his country what to do. In fact, Diaz-Canel added that Cuba is ready to defend the homeland to the last drop of blood. The renewed tensions come after the capture of Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro. According to Trump, Maduro provided Cuba with oil, while Cuba gave him manpower. Trump says Maduro's capture has severed the link between Caracas and Havana. With the U.S. exercising an oil blockade over Venezuela, Trump believes that Maduro's ouster leaves Cuba ready to fall. These fresh tensions between Washington and Havana revive memories of an old crisis. The origin of the tumultuous relationship dates back to the 1960s. That was when communist revolutionary Fidel Castro and Che Guevara overthrew dictator Fulgencio Batista in Cuba and established a communist government. This was the time when a war of ideological dominance was underway between US and Soviet Union. Cuba's proximity to America left Washington worried, and it led to a covert US operation in 1961. In fact, Cuba was close to the Soviet Union, and under Operation Bay of Pigs, US-backed Cuban exiles attempted to overthrow Fidel Castro. But the operation resulted in a humiliating defeat for the Americans, and a year later came the infamous Cuban Missile Crisis. The U.S. imposed a naval blockade on Cuba under John F. Kennedy, and this is when Cuba became the battleground of a superpower showdown. The world came ever closer to a full-blown nuclear war at this time. The crisis ended after the U.S. promised not to invade Cuba in return for the withdrawal of Soviet nuclear missiles from the island nation. Since then, both the US and Cuba have continued to have hostile relations. A Cold War-era US trade embargo continues to rattle Cuba's economy. With Maduro gone, Havana is once again in Washington's crosshairs, marking the rebirth of a half-a-century-old crisis.
Iran is on fire tonight, and this time the flames are not staying inside its borders. What began as anger on the streets, it has now turned into one of the bloodiest internal crackdowns the history has seen in years, with shockwaves reaching Washington, Tel Aviv, and far beyond the Middle East. You're watching Times XP. It's me, Dhriti Attri. Across Iran's major cities, protesters, they continue to pour out despite fear, arrests, and bullets also. Activist groups say that more than 500 people have been killed, with hundreds more detained in sweeping night raids. Families are searching for their loved ones, hospitals are under pressure, and the streets are filled with rage and grief. And then their regime, well, they pull the plug. Internet cut, phone networks restricted, social media silenced. Iran goes dark. And when a country goes dark during protests, the world knows what usually follows. A harsher crackdown hidden from cameras and witnesses as well. But this crisis does not stop at Iran's border. As protests intensify, their supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, shifts the narrative outside. Yes, from eternal dissent to external threat. Missile forces are placed on alert. Warnings are sent towards Israel and the United States. Well, the message is blunt here. Do not interfere or be ready for the consequences. Now this is a familiar tactic, right? When pressure builds at home, Tehran looks abroad. When legitimacy weakens, confrontation grows. Washington is watching closely, by the way. The White House voices open support for Iranian protesters. Officials condemn the killing, and behind the scenes, options are being studied. Military options, cyber operations, economic pressure. Donald Trump is weighing his next move. He has warned Iran before, by the way. He has spoken about red lines. And now, with deaths mounting and missiles activated, the stakes are rising fast. Israel is on high alert, by the way. For years, it has treated Iran's missile program as an existential threat. Any signal of activation is taken seriously now. Any miscalculation could trigger retaliation. This is what makes this moment so dangerous for the world. Iran is fighting its own people. At the very same time, it is threatening its enemies. Now that combination, it has sparked wars before. The blackout inside Iran creates another risk. With little verified information coming out, rumors spread faster than the facts. Misunderstandings multiply, and in tense environments, mistake comes before disaster. The world now knows that they are facing a tough question. Can Iran contain this crisis within its borders? Or will domestic unrest spill into a regional confrontation? History offers a warning here. Internal collapse often pushes regime towards external conflicts, not because they want war, but because they fear weakness even more. For now, Iran's streets remain defiant. Its leadership remain defiant, and foreign powers are watching, calculating and preparing. This is no longer just about protest. This is about survival, power and control. And when all the three collide, the cost is rarely limited to just one country. The next move from Tehran, Washington or Tel Aviv could really decide whether this crisis burns out or set the entire region alight.